The US Democrats hang their Trump impeachment hopes on a new House Intelligence Committee report now, but not everyone believes its contents, and they say there's nothing new in it anyway. The UK government faces a backlash after details are exposed of a plan 3 years ago to create a positive image of the controversial fracking industry among the general public. And a new investigation out discovers that popular free dating apps like Tinder and OkCupid don't screen whether or not their members are registered sex offenders. We asked our guests then who should be responsible for people's safety.
We need the companies to take a moral stance or at least have some sort of responsibility to protect the women that utilize their app.
You can't trust these companies to tell you who's good and who's bad. You need to take that into your own hands.
Hi there, just to midday here in Moscow this Wednesday, 4th of December. Live from the RT International World News Centre, it's Kevin Owen with your half-hour update. Great to have your company. So first, a story about Donald Trump again. The Trump impeachment saga steps up a big gear in Washington, where the US House Intelligence Committee has delivered a damning report detailing how Trump allegedly abused his office for personal gain. RT's Caleb Mopen examines the document in more detail.
Well, the report from the House Intelligence Committee Democrats essentially alleges two things about Donald Trump. First, it alleges that he conditioned military aid to Ukraine on an announcement that would have been beneficial to his re-election campaign. And secondly, it alleges that he obstructed the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry investigation. Now, Adam Schiff, representing Democrats, came forward and painted a pretty grim picture of Donald Trump and his activities. This is Adam Schiff.
This report chronicles a scheme by the President of the United States to coerce an ally, Ukraine, that is at war with an adversary, Russia, into doing the President's political dirty work. And he was willing to sacrifice the national security of the United States by withholding military aid and diplomatic recognition in the form of that White House meeting in order to get what he wanted.
Now, before departing the country on Monday, Donald Trump dismissed the allegations that were expected to be leveled in this report. This is what Donald Trump said prior to leaving the country before the report was released.
The Democrats, the radical left Democrats, the do-nothing Democrats, decided when I'm going to NATO, this was set up a year ago, that when I'm going to NATO, that was the exact time. This is one of the most important journeys that we make as president. And for them to be doing this and saying this and putting an impeachment on the table, which is a hoax to start off with.
In a recent interview, the Ukrainian leader Zelensky also dismissed these allegations about President Trump's behavior and interactions with him.
Look, I never talked to the president from the position of a quid pro quo. That's not my thing. I don't want us to look like beggars.
Now, many witnesses testified during the impeachment inquiry hearings, but observers wondered if they really made a strong case that Donald Trump had been inappropriate in his dealings with Ukraine. This is some of the testimony that was heard.
There was no mention of withholding aid on the call, correct?
That is correct, Congresswoman.
And there was no quid pro quo, correct?
Correct.
Was there any reference to withholding aid?
No, there was not.
Any reference to bribery?
No, there was not.
Any reference to quid pro quo?
No, there was not.
Do you have any information regarding any criminal activity that the President of the United States has been involved with at all?
No.
Now, before this report was released, on Monday, we had a report from the Republicans that was released. It was 123 pages long, and it defended the actions of U.S. President Donald Trump, saying that his dealings with Ukraine had not been inappropriate and had not violated the law. The fact that Donald Trump is out of the country celebrating the 70th anniversary of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that many have pointed to the timing of the report as being somewhat suspicious. However, while some are looking at the report and saying it shows very, very damning evidence against Donald Trump, others are looking at the report and saying it's simply a rehash of long discredited allegations. Different views from different sides of the political spectrum here in the United States.
However, there are many concerned about the paper's veracity. Taking either side, first off, Florida Democratic Party Chair Mitch Caesar, for one, is convinced by the report, but on the other hand, media analyst Lionel thinks it's got little meaning.
What we have here is unprecedented, and no one knows what it means because it means nothing. Why do we call it an impeachment inquiry? Because if it was an impeachment hearing or an impeachment proceeding, the president would have been allowed to invite and to subpoena witnesses. But since they didn't do that and didn't want him to do that, they called it an impeachment inquiry. And they have not changed one iota from what they said when they began the inquiry, that, and I will paraphrase it, the president used his position, his authority, under Article 2 of the Constitution for personal and/or political benefits. And the last time I checked, every president since George Washington has done this. This is not impeachable.
I do believe that the Democratic report was factual, and obviously the Republican response was perhaps a fairy tale that people do want to read, perhaps, to put someone to bed. Specifically, you have very different responses. Be on the lookout for this. What we have to look at is there's different articles that are going to come out that'll be pretty straightforward. There's going to be an abuse of power. Because, as you say in the quote, he took his interest above the national interest. There's also going to be obstruction. Some is obstruction of Congress, not letting people cooperate.
Our stories today, the UK government's facing a massive backlash after the release of a heavily redacted report on the fracking industry. British authorities never intended it to see the light of day, but it did. Greenpeace won a lengthy legal battle with the government under the Freedom of Information Act. But out of 48 pages, 37 were totally blacked out. And what remains, though, of the once secret document does show a concerted plan, it seems, to develop a positive image for the controversial gas extraction method among the general public.
The Conservatives have taken money from oil executives, trashed the rights of communities and enabled fracking companies to threaten their local environment. The fact they have tried to cover this up by redacting pages of critical information further illustrates this government's contempt for the public.
This is the Conservatives' idea of being open about their failed fracking experiment. Forced to release their report, they've heavily censored it.
This heavily redacted government report shows reference to secret plans to run a pro-shale campaign, despite the weight of scientific evidence and strength of public opinion against fracking. I dread to think what we haven't been allowed to see.
Well, it's been controversial all the way along for a long time. With more on the fight against fracking in the UK ongoing, here's Ilya Petrenko.
A high-tech, God knows what, sticking out of the ground that earns some people cash and literally shakes other people's homes. Those other people for years have been teaming up with green activists to win a war against fracking in Britain.
Right, let's get the chair here.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And finally, last month came the victory, at least for the time being. The controversial method of shale gas extraction was banned in the UK under the Prime Minister who once called it glorious news for humanity. And now that it seems there is no more need to come out and protest, the Cabinet Office has at last released a secret report on the fracking industry, despite these lines on the paper.
No part of this report or its appendices is to be released under the Freedom of Information Act.
So, you want to read something that the activists were trying to get a glance at for almost 2 years? There's a little problem. Here's what it looks like. From the 48 pages seen by The Guardian, 37 are entirely blacked out, and only one, the very front, is left uncensored. So if you're still keen to get to know about the skeletons in the industry's closet, good luck. Why would so much stuff remain hidden?
Looking at this black wall of redacted pages, people will be wondering why there's so little the government is willing to reveal about fracking and so much it wants to hide. If ministers have really dropped their support for this polluting industry, why not publish this report in full and come clean about what's been going on behind closed doors for years?
Still, though, there's enough to scratch your heads over after reading the uncensored bits in there. Here's a gist of a few ideas. There are issues with the fracking industry's progress. The main one is public opposition to fracking. It needs to be dealt with. The government should develop a pro-shale narrative and spread the word.
The Department for Energy and Climate Change is already undertaking crucial work on communications to increase public acceptability of shale. For example, creation of objective information material, development of pro-shale national and regional narrative, shale champions.
And among other useful moves that Whitehall needs to take is finding ways to speed up planning in response to operators' concerns, which is also sometimes an obstacle.
Planning times need to be shortened and process needs to be predictable.
Which all makes you wonder, why would the guys in charge ban fracking at all?
In such a document, there are always going to be sensitive parts that are embarrassing to the government, that are sensitive, that could harm the industry potentially in the future, that could show the government being too cooperative with industry, that might show motives that the public would not see in a good light. It's to protect their image and to protect their ability to move forward and continue to do what they think they need to do for the nation, which is different from what they tell the public, of course, because they tell the public whatever narrative suits them in terms of getting elected and so on. But typically it's for domestic political reasons that you would ban it. There's no other reason that I can think of. Depending on how things develop geopolitically, there might be a big impetus to develop UK shale, in which case they'll want to do it as quickly as possible.
Popular free dating apps such as Tinder and others owned by the group Match Group are not protecting their users from sex offenders on their platforms. It's been revealed in a new investigation. Investigators took a look at more than 150 incidents of sexual assault over the last decade. They found that the majority of victims were women who had met their attackers through match apps. Seems in 10% of cases they matched with men who had already been accused or convicted of sex crimes. Now, Match Group, which owns over 40 of the most popular apps, says they do conduct background checks on their members, but, crucially, only on paid accounts. Further, the company claims that they do not agree with the investigation's results.
The implication that we know about such offenders on our site and don't fight to keep them off is as outrageous as it is false. As technology evolves, we will continue to aggressively deploy new tools to eradicate bad actors, including users of our free products, where we are not able to obtain sufficient and reliable information to make meaningful background checks possible.
Chadwick Moore's a Spectator journalist and Reese Everson is a women's rights advocate. They gave us their thoughts on dating platforms and their screening policies.
The Match Group is a $1 billion company. There's no reason why they couldn't allocate just a small portion of their revenue to screen the people on their app, just so that there's just a smaller sense of increased safety. It's a precaution, it's a measure, but it's deserved.
If they're suddenly saying that we want, in order to join this service, we want to perform background checks on everyone who joins, first of all, that would kill the business, and they know it.
There's a moral responsibility on these companies that are making billions of dollars, $1.7 billion from women looking for love, to say, oh, you know what, it's too expensive for us to do a little bit to protect you.
Nobody's going to want to join these apps with these kind of, if they're being this invasive about background checks. With that said, people maybe shouldn't be on them, especially women. And not only are these apps dangerous for women, but it's destroying women. So just get off the dating apps if you don't perform your own background checks in your own time with your own money. get off.
We're not going to restrict women from using the internet because there are predators. We do deserve for these companies to at least take the step into the right direction.
Why do you want to put that kind of power on these monolithic tech companies? I'm not saying, ban women from dating apps. I'm simply saying you shouldn't rely on this. And you can't trust these companies to tell you who's good and who's bad. You need to take that into your own hands. So if you meet someone, do a background check before you go out on a date.
If they work in tandem with the courts to get the names, at least of the first and last names and the location of where these people are, and perhaps create some type of monitor of their internet, that's a step in the right direction.
It's going to be a mess, I think, no matter what. And there's always going to be people who perhaps squeak through or don't get picked up, who then commit assaults and crimes. Get a gun, ladies. Protect yourselves. And and by the way, these incidences are obviously extremely rare. By and large, the vast majority of men are not sexual predators.
One woman is enough. We need the companies to take a moral stance, or at least have some sort of responsibility to protect the women that utilize their app.
And then what happens? It's never going to be a perfect system.
If you've got views on that, check out the site, let us know. It's midday 15 Moscow time, coming to 16. This is ahead for an event that was supposed to inspire unity. It didn't. NATO's 70th birthday bash saw allies fall out and protests on the streets of London.